Hello, BookTube. I'm here to do a sort of, not a response. It's sort of, I hope it'll be an adjacent video to something that Michael K. Vaughan has done called The Text Matters. And it's talking about how the text has or can be now sort of censored or altered for sensibilities, current sensibilities. However, he does mention too, and the fact is, it's not just a current phase in publishing or things that writers have to go through. And for the most part, like everything that he says, I agree with, and it's a very good video. It covers a lot of ground, and definitely, Edgar agrees as well because, his Resurrectionist book club is because dead authors matter. Damn, dead authors matter, and they do. Uh, there's just a few things that I wanted to sort of. Well, it's not a subject. It's never a clear cut subject. It's like there are bits of it that is yes, no, you don't do, or well, and then there's gray areas. Clearly, or at least in my mind and in Michael's, where you censor language of the person for the sensibilities is a problem, and I think it is a problem. And their work matters. The text matters, as Michael says. Um, he used because he's very familiar with S.T. Joshi's work on H.P. Lovecraft. Now, I don't know all the details, but I do know what scholars like that do. And what he's done is, as Michael says, he's gone back to the original manuscripts and fixed everything up, and showing that there was changes being done when it was published, and then in the periodicals, and then eventually into book form by Arkham House. First of all, they used the magazine versions, and as well errors crept in, and then it gets perpetuated until S.T. Joshi comes along and looks at the original manuscripts. Now, my question is, and see, this is a bit of a quibble because it's quibble without knowing all the details, but it sounds like S.T. Joshi, and from what I know, is that, well, he doesn't have the final manuscript, the final draft for everything. That's pretty clear. Or he has sometimes earlier drafts, or sometimes all he has is the original publication in the magazine, in Weird Tales, for instance. Now, and he makes a judgment call. See, this is the $5 word here. I think that's what the saying is judgment call of Lovecraft style, and make, I don't know if he actually Joshi made changes based on this without having evidence of things. That I don't know. If he did, then that can be problematic in of itself. But also, it's an uneven process. Obviously, that's pretty clear, because if he doesn't have final manuscripts for everything, or other writings to say, a letter of the author saying, oh, these buggers, they changed this, blah 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 blah, um then it's it becomes a potential problem, where you've got another editor coming in and essentially changing something from the published work, the first published work, which was in Weird Tales. Now, this, most of the time, authors had say in, and the editors of the magazine sent it back, said you need to change this, and they did voluntarily. So that is their changes. That didn't always happen. There were editors that didn't do that, like H.L. Gold for Galaxy went and changed stuff for authors willy-nilly. It infuriated Heinlein, Robert A. Heinlein. So he refused to send anything to Gold after a while because he was changing his stories or words to a certain extent. So we have that. So we got all these things into the mix here. And then we get people today, some say that, oh, it's a sensibility issue, that we shouldn't have this kind of language and so forth. Now, you see, this is and they use all these things that I'm saying as evidence of saying, well, it's already been done and all this stuff's been, but yes and no. Yes, in the sense that there was changes being done, but usually within the author's lifetime, as Michael was saying, it's they had the choice to do it. So, and then the editors, are changing it to the sensibility, so that's wrong. But also on the flip side of that, an editor like S.T. Joshi changing it back to pre-publication days, is that, I'm just throwing this question out here, is that still ethical? Because we don't have the author to say that that's what they wanted. Now that is a big question, and that opens up a lot of possibilities here. So in some ways, they're just doing the opposite, like the flip side of what editors are doing by changing it, because they are changing it as well. So it is complicated. It's not a simple thing. It only becomes simple is when you've got the author saying this is how it should be, and so editor, when they published it, didn't do that. This is how I want it. But again, how they want it will differ from previous drafts that they did. So it becomes a bit of an academic, almost navel-gazing, where you go through and you look at all the possibilities of, not the possibilities, but the changes the author has made, which can get very detailed if the material is available. And with some authors, the earlier drafts and the notes are all available. For instance, well, not all of the material, but some of the material for Bram Stoker's Dracula is available, and it's in here. I have not read this yet, so I know that there's changes. So that becomes an interesting thing to delve into, and where with the annotated edition that I'm reading, this is where it becomes very interesting. Is that the annotation of Leslie Klinger's notes? He's saying that he's looking at the manuscript, and there are changes that are usually always in Stoker's head. But what were the reasons for those changes? Was it the publisher who said that you needed to change this, or there's an error here, you had to do this? Or was it him revising his final draft? Or penultimate draft, I guess, because if he's made the changes. And then there's actually going to be changes after that from the proof copies. So it becomes very interesting when all these things are noted, and it becomes a fun little thing to do. However, for most people, that becomes tedious, um, which I can understand. But to me, I love that kind of thing. And that's where I liked when Michael was showing the Hippocampus, I think that's the publisher, uh, uh, Valerium edition of Lovecraft, where he notes all the changes that he can find in like everywhere, like in the published works, the Arkham works, the from the manuscript to the magazine, uh, and that is really cool. And that takes me now to which I couldn't find my copy of Gargantua and Pantagruel by Francois Rabelais. The translation that I recently read last year was by M.A. Screech. Now, this was written in the 16th century and published in the 16th century, but published in a weird way because it was done surreptitiously or secretly at times because he was excommunicated and considered blasphemy for the Catholic Church. The writer was. And then when there was a reprint done, he would say, like, you know, his some of his remarks were, "Well, that wasn't me. That was the printer who changed it." You know. Now, do we believe the author and say that, you know, that the change is actually the real way because it gets him out of the trouble of being excommunicated, or what? That becomes a problem for a scholar, an editor to do. And but in his, like the Joshi text, he shows all the differences of the editions, and when there is information regarding of what Rabelais said about the changes, that is in in footnotes as well. However, at the end of the day, for the text itself, the editor will, like Joshi, will have to make a judgment call based on their experience and their knowledge, their expertise, to choose what is going to be in the text. Now, again, like Michael says, is the great part. You look at note on the text, and you sort of you find out what text that they're going to use, the original first edition text or the revised text. And then, if it's a revised text, and then they'll probably, because if they have a note, they're going to go into detail. So then they'll have all the changes. Or if they use the original, then they'll add the changes that came after in the notes. Or it could be a hybrid, and just throw everything in, the whole kitchen sink, with it. However, again, that, you can see, well, that's, that is a creative problem, because is that what the author wanted? And it's, it extends to other things as well. Another example here is is George Orwell. And for just instance, the Down and Out in Paris and London. There are letters back and forth. We've got the letters, and they're published in Peter Davison's 21 volume complete Orwell of the publisher Victor Golan's writing to Orwell to say that this is too harsh. It's really good writing. It's the best writing, but this scene is too delicate, and it was basically a very descriptive scene of that Orwell was being told, according to the story, about this young guy raping a woman. And it's very well written, but it is a disturbing scene. So that was pulled back a little bit. And then this was published in French as well, and the book was, and it had a lot more of the swear words in that Golan's wanted to take out. So Peter Davison has tried to put all this stuff back in, believing that this was what Orwell had intended for the story. But again, you know, and you know, there is basis on the, in this case of because there's writings from Orwell to say this. He didn't like a lot of the changes, but he acquiesced to them. He said yes to them to get it published, as authors do. So they did make that conscious choice to make those changes. So again, it comes back to which version should be the version that should be printed, or you know, put back to. But the difference here is between the authors choosing and having a say in it, or saying yes to it, rather than somebody coming along today and making those choices for them. And that goes both for the sensibilities and the editor who is trying to do a scholarly text. That goes for both. And one, I think, is more malicious than the other, because the scholarly one isn't malicious. It's sometimes can be misdirected. They think that the author, you know, they get a little too involved with it at times. But just a quick note too, with regards to the sensibilities, going back to, and Michael held up Christine Doniger's translation of Les Miserables, which is a fabulous translation. I just read this in January. And it does have the complete complete text in there, or as complete as possible. But there is a lot of material that is is questionable for translation. Not questionable so much, but for like, how do you translate it? So again, there are, and Michael was saying this, that you know, you try to get the most detailed or the most complete work. But yeah, and there's other authors that this has been, it doesn't stop, and I believe the, you know, editorial interference with authors have been since day one. Probably, I'm sure there's something on the cuneiform tablets where somebody had written something, whether it be fiction or you know, a shopping list, and the king will say, that's wrong, you've got to change that, and destroy that tablet and do a new one. I'm sure that's been done. And then it comes up to the question of, with nonfiction, which, like, you know, when you get a revised text of something, you know, because sometimes the author has found new information, or sometimes they have just changed their mind on things, and it changes, that they will rewrite the text to then fit into what they want. But going back to Les Miserables, there are many translations that have been done. The first English translation, or the UK translation, was done in 1862 by Lascaux Raxel, and he did not like the disparaging remarks that Victor Hugo made about English people in England. So he changed them, or he left them out. You know, and then you look at the first American translation, which was by Charles Wilbur. He was an archaeologist, Egyptologist. And these were all done like within the first year of publication, 1862. And then there was a pirated version that used, I believe, for the most part, his translation, but took out stuff that they thought was immaterial to the story, like some of the digressions. But also, it was written for the South, in 1862. So it was written for during the Civil War, and for Southern readers, and they took because there are sections in there and parts where Victor Hugo talks really disparaging and strongly against slavery. So those were taken out, and they were taken out because the editors and the publishers thought that was going to hurt the sensibilities of the readers to say that slavery is wrong. So that's the flip side, a coin of the sensibility, readers and editors. It can go both ways. So therefore, that is another argument in my mind to keep it the way it was. So you can see, so you don't, you don't have a changed text that will lead you to think different things. But also too, it just as another example, I want to use something that isn't as scholarly as S.T. Joshi. I wish it was, but is the complete stories of Clifford D. Simak that have been edited by David W. Dixon, who's the executor of Simak, and I might as well say of Gordon R. Dixon too, because every time I mention this, somebody in the notes will say, "Oh, but he was the executor of Gordon Dixon as well." And it's like, yeah, but that's not relevant here. But we'll say it. But his text is based on the published text in the magazines. So when it was then put, republished in book form, like some of them were, there will be some changes that Simak had made, or the editors at that time. He doesn't go into all the changes. The stories, for instance, from City, you can compare them side by side, and you can be probably quite sure that Simak had a hand in the changes for the publication of the fix-up novel City. So, but he doesn't go into all the details of all the changes, and I find I'm geeky in that way, I guess. I find all those little minutiae interesting of what's been changed, even just down to the one word. I find interesting. But I mentioned earlier too that that it's not just confined to books, films as well. For instance, because it was asked, I was asked about, has this happened with silent films? I think it was Steve Donahue that asked me in a live. And I said, well, no, not really, because it's a smaller market and people will get up in arms about it, and they do when there's changes, because there are film editors and people that are trying to. They've spent a lifetime reconstructing, films the way that they were, or have they? Well, yes and no. Again, it's a yes and no answer. And the one that I'm thinking of is Napoleon by Abel Gance. It was aired like a huge length, and then it was basically destroyed, not destroyed, but the prints got sort of to the four winds basically. Kevin Braunlau, an English, British film historian, spent about 50-60 years piecing this back together with the help of Abel Gance as well, and trying to find as much material as possible to create an authentic, original, presentation of the film the way Abel Gance wanted it. But again, he could only do so much because There were a lot of scenes that were missing, and Abel Gance even played with like every time it was aired or screened, he changed it a little bit. Like he cut, added, cut, added. So we have all this stuff. Like, what do you choose? But obviously, well, not obviously, but I think you choose something that makes a good story and as full a story as you possibly can, because he did film this and directed this to be an epic. And then, Kevin Braunlau has spent, as I say, 50 plus years doing this. And then Francis Ford Coppola comes along and takes it and says he now owns the copyright to this, cuts it up, takes out stuff that Kevin Braunlau has spent, 50 years putting in, and changes and changes the order of some scenes, and gets his father to write a very well. This is a subjective, but I say a bad score to it, and has prevented this being shown and worldwide, but specifically in the United States. This has infuriated film preservationists and historians, even though Francis Ford Coppola pretends to be, because I say pretends because he does this and then he says he's for preservation. Yeah, only if he can fiddle with it. But anyway, but then now, in the last couple of years, many more hours of material has come to light in France that was mislabeled in cans. So that's being edited and restored to be put in. But again, this is going to be a big, massive, 9 hours when it's done, with a couple more hours from Kevin Braunlau's, which I'm all for, and I want to see it. However, again, it raises, well, is this what Abel Gance, was this his vision? And was his final vision the best vision? Sometimes the artist is not in the best position to make that claim. It's what they want, which is relevant and important, but it may not be the best presentation of things. That's another little sort of quibble, I guess, into this argument that has to be thought about when discussing this kind of thing. So there's lots and lots of little things that need to be thought of, and it like most things, it's not an easy yes, no, on, off switch for this. There are questionable things, and they need to be questioned and discussed. However, changing something and taking something out because you don't like what's in there is going too far, I think. That is pretty clear. Another example of this being done with film is the original Eric von Stroheim's Greed. Now, he filmed so much material, and he cut it down. It's become apocryphal of how long this originally was. And then it was taken away from them, and then it was re-edited down to a little over 2 hours, or around 2 hours. It's been reconstructed to as much as possible from stills, because the original film material is not in existence. The moving film is just the stills. To about 4 hours, 4.5 hours, but that's still probably not what Eric von Stroheim wanted. So this is one of the holy grails of silent films, is to find the material that was cut out. from when it was taken away from Stroheim. And here's another example of sometimes the artists may not be the best judge to say this is the final way. And Michael used this with Mary Shelley's 1819 text, Frankenstein in 1832 text. And, a lot say that the 1819 text is better. Again, that's a judgment call, but, based on certain things. Now, we turn to Charles Chaplin, who in his later life fiddled with most of it. He wasn't interested in his really early stuff, but here's an example of what he fiddled with, and he re-edited was the Gold Rush. And he actually put in the 50s, he put a soundtrack to it with sound effects, music, and his narration. It's not near as good as the original silent version, in my opinion, and a lot of people's version. However, there was a box set that was put out, and David Robinson, the preeminent Charles Chaplin scholar, had worked on this as well, and they wanted it to be the final what Charles Chaplin wanted as the final cut, I guess, as you say. And so that works. And thankfully, though, we do have the original Gold Rush that they can actually tack on to the DVD at the time and Blu-rays now. But yeah, it as I said, it is very, very difficult to talk about something like this in a straightforward way, because there's so many things that come into it. But Michael's is very good. I'll leave a link to it below. But as I say, it's just I just wanted to do this to sort of add my 2 cents to muddy the water, I suppose. But I do disagree, as Edgar does, with the changes that are being made now for sensibility, and that we need to do this because somebody might be offended. I always go by like Monty Python, and I think it was John Cleese that said, people need to be offended, basically, to shock them out of their complacency, and that actually shows that things hopefully have gotten better, because when you see how the sensibilities were in the past. And rather than thinking that things were always the same and always perfect, in which they never were. And always keep in mind the sensibilities of the pirated Les Miserables, where you take out something like slavery because it's going to offend the people who want slavery. That's the other side of the coin, and it's an easy flip to make. A very easy flip to make. For people to do. So that is the danger of this kind of thing, and that I'm calling it a danger, and it is a danger. And despite what everybody, I've seen other videos, people say, it's not censorship and that, and it's like, well, it is. When you take something out that you don't like, that is censorship. There's different levels of censorship. Or, because there's censorship after the fact, there's censorship before it gets done, censorship and so forth. But it's all censorship. Simple as that. As I say, just look up the word. And people say, look up the word and you'll see it's not. It is. It's as simple as that. Anyway, I've been going on now for 35 minutes for this. And I'll link Michael's video down below. And if you've made it this far, thank you very much.